So, for anyone who's listening, I recently started to enter a couple of events with the Puma Cup. The Puma Cup is a one-make circuit racing series sitting at the entry-level end of the motorsport spectrum. I'm going to talk about how I got into all this because circuit racing had always been something I'd wanted to try, but I'd found it really difficult to know where to start. And I'm sure there are others out there who are in the same place I was, and therefore might find this useful. I hope. I've only done 5 events so far, so I'm still a proper novice with the sticker and everything. So don't expect much in terms of racing technique or racecraft. It's just going to be an explanation of how I started from the point that I made the decision to the day that I found myself on track. I'll start with what you might need to consider to make the decision to go racing. Then I'll go over things like tow cars and trailers, to getting the race gear and license sorted, covering what you should probably do before booking your first race, and finishing off with what you should expect from a typical race day. I'll also go over the costs involved in setting up to race and to then run a season, bearing in mind that all of my knowledge comes only from my experience with the Puma Cup. I'm not certain, but I'm sure a lot of the content will be transferable to other circuit racing series. So let's jump into it, and let's start with making the decision to race. I think it can feel like racing is too far out of reach for the uninitiated. It's certainly an expensive and all-consuming hobby, and if you're anything like me, you'll worry about how well you'll actually take to it once you're out there on track. The following are some of the major factors that might be affecting your decision to go racing. Assuming you've got a vehicle that can tow, but need to get yourself a trailer, get your license sorted, race gear, and a ready-to-race car, I'd say you'd need to budget at least $6,500 to $8,000 to get yourself ready to go. This sort of budget will get you into the entry-level end of the circuit racing spectrum, such as the Puma Cup, for example. For me, I'm probably in for about $7,000 to $8,000 at this point, spent over a period of years before actually landing on track. It's worth mentioning that in the Puma Cup and other CSCC race series, you can opt to race with 2 drivers per car entry, and therefore split the costs down the middle. So again, taking the Puma Cup series as an example, there are a total of 9 events on the race calendar in 2021. I believe you'd need to set aside just under $5,500 to run the entire season, and that's before adding your fuel costs for travelling to and from the race weekends. Briefly, this encompasses your licence and club renewals, series entry, race entries, tyres and other wear and tear items such as brake pads, fuel, oil, and some other consumables. And again, it's worth reiterating that some cars run as 2-man teams, splitting the costs between themselves. Firstly, it's important to know you don't have to commit to every race within a season. The Puma Cup, for example, is run as a series and not a championship, so each race is standalone, which means we're not accumulating points towards an overall championship win. We're just trying to win poles, podiums, and therefore trophies on the day. I believe a lot of other club level series also operate in the same way. So you can pick and choose your races. After that, we need to consider the time you'd need to put into preparing and competing for each race. Regarding prep time, well, this is going to come down to how competitive you want to be. Talking specifically about the Puma Cup cars, they are pretty basic, they're not highly strung, and therefore they don't need a huge amount of maintenance and preparation. I find I can get myself all ready to go the weekend before an event. And then most races at this level consist of just one day, but you're going to want to turn up the night before because most tracks are going to be some distance from wherever you are, and you'll want to tackle the race day with a fresh head. So sum it up with using 2 to 3 days of your time overall per event. And I managed to do this around my full-time Monday to Friday job. The single biggest question that I had, and still creeps into my mind now, will you actually be able to keep up with the others, let alone stand to be competitive? In my first race, for example, I started out last and I fell further and further back as the race went on. However, I got a bit fed up with this and I just forced myself to increase pace. I pulled it back to finish 4th of 6 in class. Before this, I had gathered some track day experience, and if you've never been on a track yet, I think it's fair to say this is an absolute must before throwing yourself into a circuit race. If you can manage a track day comfortably at a reasonable pace, then you should be fine taking it to a circuit, especially if you go in with the same approach that I did and just aim to start off at the back and work on finishing the race. And just tell yourself that at any time you can just come into the pits to end it. Now, talking to yourself like that helps get you out there, but once you are actually out there, you find you don't want to stop, in my experience at least. So we're not supposed to talk about this, but it's going to be there, you're going to be thinking about it. I was, still am. It seems as though racing incidents are relatively few and far between, and the majority of might be a little bit of contact with someone and someone then ends up in a gravel trap. And you might worry about getting hurt because the risk is certainly there. So you'll have these worries going into it, but for me, those initial worries were just completely overridden, firstly by the thought of never trying and then wondering what if. And secondly, I've found that when you're out there on track, your focus on the task at hand overrides any anxieties that you had in the run-up to the race. As for dealing with damage to your car, okay, so you need to be ready to take the risk of losing a good chunk of cash if you were to have a bad crash during a race. Needless to say, there's no car insurance that's going to cover your damages out there. Some bits might still be salvageable, so you'll rarely be back to square one, but you're probably going to be knocked out of a season at least, especially if you're doing it on a budget. However, I need to stop the scaremongering because from what I've seen so far, you can stay relatively out of harm's way if you want. For example, I've had a few moments where I could have taken a dive up the inside of somebody, but just didn't. And then it's worth mentioning that in some race series, such as the Puma Cup, you'll end up racing on track alongside faster cars who will be in their own separate race. You will be traffic to these faster drivers, but all you need to try and remember is to stick to your racing line and let them find a way past. It's something I still struggle with now. Feel like I'm getting there, but yeah, it's difficult to not get panicked by something flying up behind you, especially when they're like 2 or 3 abreast. Well, that's enough for one video. Hopefully you're still listening and you found this useful. Maybe you're a bit clearer on making that decision to go racing. Don't just take it from me, try speaking with as many people as you can from all sources. For example, get yourself along to a race event, get in the paddock and try speaking to some of the drivers if they don't look too busy. And also try looking at Motorsport UK, MS UK for short, which is the national organisation and governing body for four-wheeled motorsport in the UK. In the next video, we're going to assume you've done a couple of track days, you've made that decision to go racing, and so I'll go over all the kit and gear that you're going to need to start.